So you can also you could see what is going on, like no music, so the time. People can just see like chapters and contributors. So don't worry, and we have our discussion. Lina showed me a fantastic. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, we can improve it later. This is first version, right? Be here in control. I just say it. Because it is too younger ones. No, I see.
One. Okay. Hello, once again, everyone. It's really a pleasure to have you here in the room. Thank you for coming. Let me introduce you the last panel discussion we have today on the future of intellectual capital, which we discussed intellectual capital in different contexts today. But right now we want to introduce you kind of a really interesting project, a book. We were working more than a year on it. On behalf of the New Club of Paris, I want to say thank you to all the contributors before we begin. But this was quite an interesting journey, bringing pioneers of the theory and the conception, and also youngsters, younger generations, and building bridges between those two generations. So let me, first of all, introduce our panelists, then the agenda, how we will organize this panel, and then we will proceed. So I will start from the editors of the book. Let me introduce Professor Aino Kianto. Aino Kianto is a professor of knowledge management at Lathe University, Finland, and also the member of the New Club of Paris. The next editor of the book is Professor Sladana Cabrilo. Sladana is a professor of management at Aisho University, Taiwan, and since today, a board member of the New Club of Paris. And congratulations, Sladana. And we received 16 interesting contributions, and more than 20 authors contributed to the book. And today we have 3 of them. First of all, Stefan GÜLDENBERG, the president of New Club of Paris and also academic director of the graduate school in Lausanne, Switzerland. Also, Professor Guenter Koch, who is a honorary member of New Club of Paris, one of the co-founders of the club, and also founder of the Humboldt Cosmos Multiversary. And one more author participating here today is Professor Guenter Scogs, also the member, no professor, okay, too humble to be called professor, but yeah, it's also one of the founding members of New Club of Paris and really contributing to our activities. So 3 of the authors are participating today. What will be the agenda of our panel discussion? First of all, the idea of how the book was started developing will be introduced by Professor Aino. Then we will move to Professor Sladana. She will introduce the structure of the book and the key ideas behind the chapters and ideas proposed in the book. And later on, we will ask all the authors participating here briefly introduce key ideas behind their chapters in the book. And then we will move to some discussion, questions here in the panel, and of course, questions from the audience. So let's start. I'll give a word to Professor Aino Kianto with the introduction of idea, how we started this interesting journey.
Okay, thank you so much, Lina. Yeah, so I think everything started on a dark, cold winter night in January 2022. Sladana and I were having a Teams meeting between Finland and Taiwan and trying to come up with a suitable and inspiring idea for a conference paper to jointly present at the European Conference on Knowledge Management, which that year was held, I think in Napoli, yeah. And as we started, toying around with ideas, I think that both of us had sort of been faced with the realization that while both of us had been studying and teaching intellectual capital for almost 2 decades, we somehow had the impression that the discussion hasn't really been moving too much forward in the recent years. I, for one, have been very guilty of making many quantitative studies on the impact of intellectual capital on various dimensions of organizational performance, which, while having been published in quite reputed journals even, are just making some kind of incremental contributions to what we already knew about intellectual capital. And to be quite honest, we were starting to get a little bit bored of these discussions, which, we felt are still centered around these very fundamental basic ideas that were constructed by the first generation classics of intellectual capital school of thought, such as Leif Edvinsson, Karl-Erik Sveibu, Göran Roos, and you know all of these people. So a lot of the discussion was still reveling or even being trapped within what we lovingly like to call the 3 boxes of intellectual capital. Human capital, structural capital, and relational capital. And of course, this kind of perspective to organizations, and why not even societies and individuals and so on, provides a very valuable strategic framework to think about the valuable intangible resources that you need in whatever productive activities you or your system is trying to strive for. But we really had the sense that, we have been just speaking about these same things now for several decades. But at the same time, there have been such tremendous disruptions in the work life, in the business models, in the global system as a whole, that can this approach, basically deriving from 3 decades ago, still be completely valid? Or should there maybe be the need for more radical update of both intellectual capital theory as well as the related practices. So this was our idea with Sladana. So then we wrote first a conference paper to European Conference on Knowledge Management 2022. Then we elaborated our thinking a bit further, addressed some megatrends we were seeing happening in the world, and really tried to generate some ideas how things like digitalization, remote work, gig work, sustainability crisis, for example, how these kind of megatrends should impact our understanding of intellectual capital. We also continued this work next year in the subsequent European Conference on Knowledge Management, and also collaborating with a more junior colleague of mine, Assistant Professor Henri Hussinki, also from LUT University, Finland. We also produced a book chapter to the 20 years anniversary book of a sister association of New Club of Paris, the International Association for Knowledge Management. But still we felt that, okay, now we have the ideas of three rather, passionate and knowledgeable people about this topic. But, it's still only the ideas coming from the three of us. So we really felt the need to engage this community of intellectual capital scholars more widely. And this was really our mission then, to try inspire the engaged members in our community to join us for this challenge of really trying to rethink intellectual capital theory and practice. And now over to Sladana.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will just continue this kind of, let's say, like story. And what we actually hoped, we really hoped to receive new, brave, and courageous ideas. So that was the way actually to really make some progress, let's say, like in intellectual capital theory and practice. And we couldn't be more happy than we are now, right? Like we, for the beginning, because this is just beginning of the journey. It's not the end, definitely. So it's just still ongoing and all the time developing, like field of, let's say, like research and practice. And, we collected 16 chapters. You can see here, we will also, like after repeat the video so that you can see, let's say, like contributors and some kind of, let's say, like their chapter ideas and their main contributions. But, like what I would like to, let's say, like very briefly introduce the book. We collected 16 chapters, and although these are just, let's say, like individual narratives, that means contributors actually didn't know much about other contributors. We actually really tried and made efforts to group these ideas into some kind of bigger parts, and we actually at the end made basically 4 parts of the book. In section 1 and the first part of the book, more or less, like authors challenge prevailing linear and static and unidimensional thinking about intellectual capital. So what they tried actually to emphasize more on something like multi-level, full of dynamics, IC ecosystem thinking. So we grouped, and this is group of 5 chapters that we have in part 1 of the book. Then in second part of the book, it's more about smart and societal growth, global one. So this section actually explores how intellectual capital extends beyond organizations and operates within, for example, public sector, nations, and global communities. So this is more like this part includes 3 chapters that are quite, let's say, devoted to global growth, global
sustainability, how intellectual capital contributes to these, let's say, global concepts. Part number 3 of the book actually considers where intellectual capital meets artificial intelligence and that kind of interplay between intellectual capital and artificial intelligence. This part includes 3 chapters, but basically all chapters somehow addressed in some sense that AI issues, but more or less it was, the focus was about human aspects of digital transformation. So chapters and authors somehow insist on that kind of humanization, and although they really consider AI as important, let's say like disruptive change in our environment and global work life, they still believe that human aspect should be the most important driver of our, let's say, global sustainable growth. And then the last part of the book includes 5 chapters. More or less, they try to rethink economic models, to try to redefine value, what is really value, what should be value, who should decide on what is really value in our global society, and they try actually to rethink the progress in the future knowledge year. So these 5 chapters, I would say all chapters are quite thought-provoking, so that's what we really hope to receive, something more brave and something really like new and fresh ideas to collect for the beginning. So this is not the end, because I think this is just beginning. If we really want to develop the field further, then we really need to be open all the time for this kind of contributions and discussion. And what I think is our, we also try to include that in this kind of video is that we had so wonderful, let's say like a joint academic journey together with contributors. Like people really felt that kind of positive energy. And I think it's really some kind of good recipe how to create something really good for the future. So to make that kind of platform for future, let's say like new generation of researchers maybe, and practitioners, why not? Yeah. So that's my part, and now I will just...
If I can just say something more. The 3 of us, the 3 editors, we also made the decision that we didn't want to put the call of papers, just openly out there for anybody to send anything, but we were actually discussing among ourselves first, who we thought would be the people with the bright new ideas, who actually know where this discussion is coming from, so that they also would have an understanding of what has been said and what would be the novelties actually needed. So the call for papers we put out, it was actually quite targeted. So we were promoting in European Conference of Knowledge Management 2023 in Lisbon. We were also promoting in the New Club of Paris meeting this book idea, and also Lina, Sladana and I, we also personally contacted some of the key thinkers in this community for their contributions. Yeah, to have, the people who we thought might come up with the potential bright new ideas. And what we were really emphasizing, I think, when being in contact with the authors, was that we really wanted to have some courageous, brave new thinking. Being in a church, I can say that maybe we're encouraging people to be even a little bit iconoclastic, if I can use this term, being here in the altar in the church. Yeah.
Thank you, co-authors, for this brief introduction of the idea of the book and the structure and what ideas lies behind every chapter and every part of the book. May I give a word to 3 authors participating here today. It's really a pleasure to have you here. and to have you as authors in the book. So I'll give a word to Stefan first of all. Just briefly introduce the idea behind your chapter, what you want to share with the audience. Okay?
Okay, good, great. Yeah, thank you very much. Now it's on. Yeah, now you can hear me. Thank you again for the editors for this huge effort. It's also next year the upcoming 20th birthday of the New Club of Paris, and it's very timely to have the theory renewed on that and thinking about the future of intellectual capital. So I could not be more thankful as the president of New Club of Paris that you initiated that. I know it's a huge effort to put a book together, so thank you very much for this. Speaking about the future of value and success, we had it already yesterday that we need to think again about the measures, and yesterday and also today, this morning, for example, Bodo put very much his thoughts around the Nobel Prize winners. And actually, when you listen carefully this morning, you know already of whom we are talking about. It's especially this person's here. And it's really an interesting read when you go into detail what they have written about, and I think it's very timely, not just for the New Club of Paris, but also for the redefinition of value and success. I really recommend their main paper, why they got the Nobel Prize on it, countries with better institutions. We discussed already yesterday, also during the gala dinner, what that kind of implications that might have given the conflicts going around worldwide, but also giving the elections results in some large countries. And one of their famous and central messages basically is that country with better institutions will invest more in human capital and therefore will have more prosperity. And I think you can not summarize better the main idea of the New Club of Paris, taking care of the knowledge economy and the new frameworks and requirements of the knowledge economy of that also. And what they have done in their paper is basically to analyze that historically, where you see countries like the US, like Singapore, like New Zealand, like Australia on the top, where there was really a good protection of property rights, of human capital, investment in human capital, and that leads to a long-term thinking of the development of the societies. And where that protection is not given, especially in countries where you have not a good protection of property rights, and in the future it's of course intangibles. Think about artificial intelligence, how well intangible rights are protected, intellectual property rights especially, then of course that leads to short-term thinking and just short-term optimization and not long-term growth. So that was the basic idea of my chapter. I contributed to the book to emphasize this important and not just to keep that abstract in the academic world, but to put some most updated and current examples to that. Not sure how many have heard about Ruth Gottesman. She is a founder, a big founder. Her husband built up some wealth together with Warren Bennis and the investment fund of Warren Bennis. She earned that money when her husband died, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, and she gave the money to a medical school. It's the Bronx Medical School, 1 billion, significant endowment, to basically reduce the debts of the students, because one big challenge in the United States is that you have to pay for your studies. Most students cannot afford, so you go to bank basically to get loans, and then when you are a graduate, you have a huge amount of debt with a huge pressure to pay that back. So to increase the number of medical students, which we all need for our health in the future, and to have a scholarship program, and that endowment will allow now the school to provide basically free studies and free opportunities for future doctors to study at the school. So there I said in the chapter, she has understood that principle, transforming financial capital, which is available in large amounts there. Just look at the US election to transform that to future human capital, which is something where you can see that is really a best practice. And Roland mentioned just this morning, we should more focus on best practices and not worst practices. But just to make that more transparent, I've also compared that towards the bad practice, the worst practice. We have 1,000 days of tragedies and human loss of capital in various forms. When you look to the Ukraine-Russian conflict with many refugees, with many dead and wounded people, and a lot of cost involved in the war. And there's just an article which came out a couple of days ago from the Business Insider I highly recommend to read, because it's analyzing the biggest problem Mr. Putin has at the moment, which is really the brain drain of his country, losing the best people for the future, which gives that country, of course, not a great perspective. Then I went last week to the Drucker Forum, where the basic title was The Next Knowledge Work. So you can say also the next knowledge management. And I met this professor, and I highlight him, Gian Piero Petriglieri, because he's well known in this region, as his father, Professor Pietro Petriglieri, was a very well-known professor in medicine, in anatomy, in this area of medicine. And I was really moved, not just by the presentation of Gian Piero, but also by the memorable words towards his father. He died also, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. And Gian Piero, also studying himself medicine, following in the footsteps of his father, decided then there might be even a more important discipline to focus his attention on than medicine, and that is management. And he decided to become the first humanistic professor on management, given his background that he studied first medicine, then psychology, and now he is one of the leading professors on management and organizational behavior at INSEAD, and I really recommend his readings. And he shared a story which reminded me of a very similar story. He shared that around his surrounding at INSEAD, where the imperial castle of Versailles is very nearby. We met at the imperial castle in Vienna, and I myself grew up at another imperial castle, which is Ludwigsburg in Germany, so nearby this fantastic site. I grew up, and we had a neighbor where this neighbor was working at the castle. And I asked him, what does motivate you to work for such an old historic site? Yeah, when you're young, you think it might be boring to give everyday tours in this kind of museum. It's kind of outdated. And the answer was very close to what Gian Pietro presented in Vienna, was, well, the motivation comes from people live there in this organization, and it's true. It's true in this castle, it's true in Versailles, that actually it's the home of many people still today. It's not just a museum. It's the home of renovators, decorators who constantly have to work, It's the home of tour guides, it's the home of musicians who play music there, but last but not least, it's also the home of people who have the apartments in their castle. So it's used by living spaces. Actually, I had also a colleague or friend who attended with me the school who lived there. So I saw that. And I think it's a beautiful metaphor for future organization, also connecting to what you presented, Ines, that we need to perceive organizations not just as machines or as optimizing organisms for making money, and but really as living homes, as in French you would say as maisons, that they provide the living. So, and then the work-life balance, which is often mentioned, perceives in a very different connotation with that, because it's not work-life, it's exactly the opposite, it's around. It's life-work, and work is a major part of our living. There is no separation here. So if we can understand organizations in the future much more as living organizations, as living homes, that would humanize management in many senses, and that is my pledge here for the future understanding of value and success of these organizations, to understand them much more as living homes. And that has implications for leadership. Of course, you know this guy here, Peter F. Drucker, who mentioned long ago that we need a mind shift among our leaders, and he was asked the question, who do you see as the most important leader, who is the greatest leader? And his answer during that time was also quite unusual. So he could refer to Jack Welch, for example, from General Electric, or other managers of big, great companies. Today, when you would ask someone the same question, it would be probably Elon Musk or some others leaders here, but his answer was very unusual. We referred to this woman, and I had the pleasure to meet her and even providing seminars together with her in her all the ages. It's Frances Hasselbein. And Frances Hasselbein, in her last years, leading the Peter Drucker Institute for Nonprofit Organizations, but before she did that, she was the CEO of Girl Scout. And the answer of Peter Drucker was, who can ever be a CEO of Girl Scout, who is the female organization of, you can say, the pathfinders, so young girls connected together. She can run any organization, because Girl Scout as an organization is still today a vast organization, a voluntarily organization, a non-profit organization in the United States. And who can run this organization, who can run any organization. And she said, yeah, leadership is really a matter of how to be and not how to do it. So it's not instrumental, and that's exactly part of this humanistic management, that it is not a question of that people are means to the end, but they are really the end. They are the purpose of the organization when you want to provide a living home here. So we have to change a little bit here our perception, also how we work together with human beings. So that's changing in the end our measures of success a lot, and we need to understand that. So that would be the traditional measures of focusing on quantity, on parts, on units, on shareholder value, on the national and international level, on the gross domestic product, return on investments. We all know that. We had yesterday the discussion on growth, economic growth, but also population growth, efficiency, profitability, and still today, these are the normal terms we use. Now we will get a minister for efficiency in the United States, when we still focus on population growth, and capitalism is dependent on economic growth and population growth. We will not be here around for the next 20 years because population is not growing any longer. Just look into the statistics. It's fascinating to see that now over 60 countries are shrinking worldwide, including the superpowers, including Russia, including China. These are shrinking nations. They are no longer growing nations. So if you depend this capitalistic system on that, it will no longer work. So we have to change to quantity, as Peter Drucker already mentioned. In a knowledge age, it's much more important to focus on quality. So quality is the new measure of a knowledge worker, and the question is, of course, how to do it. We have to change shareholder value towards the stakeholders, so involve much more groups, and that's a long-term discussion around the accounting and finance community. We have made a proposal as New Club of Paris to change the gross domestic product towards the national intellectual capital, maybe even sustainable national intellectual capital, as the new measure for nations and rankings. So what is the renewal capital of nations? What is the innovation capital of nations? That's much more important to see that than instead of the gross domestic product. We have to change our view on return on investment towards the return on intellectual capital. When we give loans, when banks evaluate if they will get their money back, and that's also important to change the conditions here, how we get money for future investments. We have to change our perspective and importance of economic growth towards sustainability and peace. We have to change our understanding of population growth much more towards human development, health, and flourishing, or blossoming, as we had this term yesterday in the World Cafe. We have to change efficiency, of course, towards effectiveness. So from doing the things right to doing the right things, focusing on the right things, and in the end, establishing something which is called organizational intelligence. And I'm a long time exchange with Leif and others, how we can make that happen, how we can organize and design organizations around organizational intelligence. Last but not least, to go away from the term profitability towards organizational longevity and resilience, also to focus on these health measures of organizations in the future. And that's basically my input. If you're interested in more, please feel free to read my chapter in the book. That was just a short summary of what I proposed there. And I'm looking forward to continue the discussion on that, because it's really important also for the education of our next generation, to give them other measures of success, what a successful life will be, but also what success in management will mean in the future. Thank you very much. Maybe we do all the presentations and then ask questions. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's the day of surprises, because it's the first time is it okay? It's the first time that we could see our co-authors. I didn't know who they are. And the second surprise is, Stefan, you made such a broad and good introduction that I'm questioning myself what is left for me now. I took the decision on spot now to make a reference to the history of the New Club of Paris, which to me seems to elucidate also a little bit the raison d'être, the rationale why we are doing these things. And if I memorize back to the age when it came into existence, Leif Edvinsson called himself the grandfather of intellectual capital reporting. And we had that nice wordplay that he is the grandfather, I am the father. But at that time, it came to my idea to put the whole story on a political level. And this was more or less a founding situation, because I approached the European Commission I approached the European Commission with this idea of intellectual capital. And this was in a phase of the political development of the European Commission when the so-called Lisbon strategy was put in action. And it turned out that the Lisbon strategy did not work. What was the Lisbon strategy? The Lisbon strategy of the European Commission was to invest in research. These were, today it's called Horizon programs. At that time, they were huge, the first time huge R&D investment program. And they thought it could be that the spin-offs out of these research programs could renovate and develop the European economy with new ideas and high-tech spin-offs, etc., etc. And then it turned out it didn't work. And by the analysis why it didn't work, it turned out that the survival rate of spin-off companies was less than 5 years at that time. And the reason for it was that they forgot about the financial support of developing these companies. Financial support meant at that time that there was no much venture capital at that period, and they had no financial structure to help these new companies to grow. And when I met the European Commission at that time, and interestingly enough, there were 3 general directorates which jumped on the idea to include intellectual capital valuation in the balance sheets of companies. The idea was these companies have no balance sheet history, and for this reason we need to find out something which adds in value to these companies. And the idea to evaluate intellectual capital and put it into the balance sheet was very convincing to them. The only thing why it didn't happen at that time, and this was in the year 2003, 2004, when we had founded that famous Ricardes report, which was the founding situation for the new Club of Paris, was there was one commissioner. At that time, there were 16 members of the European Union, and there was one commissioner who was an auditor by profession. It was McCreevy from Ireland, and he was a hardline thinker. And he said, these intellectual capital issue, this is all hot air, and it opens doors for bribery and criminal acts. And since his colleagues at the Commission, the other 15, were no experts in this domain, they said, okay, before we make that decision and create a directive in changing the balance sheet rules, we better leave it as it is. So just think about it. This was in 2003. And only more than, I would guess, 15 years later, the European Commission, or even more than that, in their famous strategies in changing what's called the Green Deal. The Green Deal, a big decision. If you look to the Green Deal discussion at the early stages, you will find out that there was a discussion on what is called dual materiality. Dual materiality means, in essence, that in addition to the financial report, you need to have a second dimension in defining the value of, or defining at least issues of quality like sustainability, etc. Now, then they discovered that the two things are interrelated and that you cannot discuss these two aspects separately. And of course, they discovered that parts of the so-called second materiality needs to be transformed into the first materiality. These things are interdependent, so to speak, that the one level of valuation has an influence on the second one. And this was more or less, I would say, in history of setting up the rules for accounting. And Pierluigi and colleagues know it much better how it works. This was a time when the whole idea of putting forward directives for the GES, for example, started, and today we have a huge discussion between several institutions like the IFRS and you name them, EFAS, and there are many, many bodies, which, by the way, I refer in my article to. They are concerned about how to transform values from the qualitative world into the quantitative financial world. So this is a bit of history and also a bit of legitimation why the new Club of Paris exists, because this was at the founding situation when we started. And since this famous commissioner stopped our initiative, it was Leif Edvinsson, Ahmed Wonfo, and myself said, okay, we cannot stop this discussion, we need to continue. And this was the founding situation of the new Club of Paris. Now, having said so, I was challenged by the three ladies who are the editors of this famous book, which now comes on the market soon. They challenged people like us, sitting here, to give some arguments, what is the future of intellectual capital reporting? Hard times for me. I ended up my article to say I have not a new model, which I would like to have put forward because this is a research program I should offer, but I can give you some ideas what I think should be considered. And I started my article in discussing alternative economic models, and we had, and the first session we had yesterday, also it was a little bit corrupted in the sequence, it was about degrowth, for example, but I made, Anja, bye-bye, they are leaving. I put forward some alternative models in my discussion, and in my studies I found a very interesting quotation, which I also put into this article, and I would like to repeat it here. It has been brought forward by persons like Mark Fisher's theory on capitalism, capitalistic realism, or complementary socialist realism by Frederick Jameson, and one famous philosopher who is putting forward this idea, or who is very well known at least. I know that also Guenter met him on the book fair in Frankfurt. It's Slavoj Žižek. He is a very provocative philosopher, and the statement they put together was that they said, it is easier to imagine an end to the world than an end to capitalism. Now, this was a disappointing insight I gained. So capitalism cannot be changed. It's more likely that the world ends than the capitalism would end. So I took the decision in my contribution to say, okay, let's assume, also I'm not happy with this situation, and let's find out what can be done within that existing, prevailing capitalistic system. What can we do, what can I do in order to contribute to the challenge which was put forward to me by the three ladies. And the approach I took was that I said, okay, one thing we need to know, we should know how to do is to turn externalities into internalities. That means that things which in the economic world usually are delegated to the world outside of companies, to be of public interest and to be paid by taxes, etc. And the society has to carry as a whole. The typical example is, for example, expenditures for caused by traffic and transport. So the streets, for example, which are built, that they are built with public money, at least in most of the cases. And these are externalities which companies usually did not in the past turn into internalities. They had it not in their balance sheets. And in order to have a more realistic picture, there is a tendency to request companies to put externalities into internalities. And that raises a new challenge to the companies in respect to evaluate, for example, and this is one example that is close to my heart, can you evaluate nature? Is it possible to make something like nature accounting? Nature accounting might be of interest if you as a company take resources from nature, or if you damage nature, for example, and you can put a value on that. you have to put that in your own balance sheet in the company in order to take measures you have to pay for in order to regenerate what you have taken before from nature. Now, accounting of nature is a new idea, which is, by the way, for the moment only in discussion. I should ask experts like Pierluigi if that is already underway to be put into the balance sheet standards. As much as I know, it's not yet the case, but there are relevant scientific work being done in this respect. And I would like to refer to an international standardization initiative. There is a standard called ISO 1454. You should not remember that, what I'm saying. But the interesting thing is there are groups of scientists who really are seriously working in the direction to measure how the natural capital can be accounted in a systematic way. And to me, this is important because if you are talking about intellectual capital reporting systems and intellectual capital reports, you need to have some kind of basis, which is accounting usually, in order to know what you can put into your balance sheet and what you keep outside your balance sheet, or what is intellectual capital and what it is not. And I think this idea of evaluating nature and natural issues is something which in the age of sustainability discussions and saving the planet discussion should be considered. Now, having said this is just an idea which I made in my contribution. I could go to the details now. What I think should be done to develop a new intellectual capital report system. I ended up my contribution, and that will be my final statement and my final remark. I also felt challenged, of course, that intellectual capital has something to do with artificial intelligence, of course. And the question I put myself is, if you integrate in your company's values results which are produced by an artificial intelligence system, just as let's say a substance you take into your company as a value, is that something you can put into an intellectual capital report, yes or no? And my contribution to this issue was more or less you have to take decisions case by case. So if you are using generative artificial intelligence and the results of generations of an artificial intelligence system, and you would take this as a value which belongs to your company, you have to think about if this is really part of an intellectual capital or not. And this process, that's of interest, and I think, sorry, we have this, no, it's getting, this we have to take into, sorry, now it's good that I'm coughing. I have to end up my contribution at this point in time. Thank you.
Yeah, I also would like to thank the editors. I think it was really a very good initiative to ask us to examine actually what the developments in intellectual capital have been over the last decades already, and to ask what is actually the reason that it at one time was such a hype, was discussed on highest political levels, and now you don't feel it is such an urgent, important issue. My background has been that I have been an educationalist. I've been director in Commerzbank. I had a department on skill resources and knowledge management, and I used it to cooperate with all kinds of different universities. We addressed the issues on fairs for educational technologies. We worked with Bitkom, which is the Association for Technology in Germany, and they had big conferences on intellectual capital, the NOTEC. We had initiatives in the financial systems, like the Knowledge of the Year was very prestigious. We worked with media like the Financial Times Germany. And so one asks oneself, why has this kind of faded away? And I want to start the other way around. I want to begin with the end of the article, with the end of the chapter I contribute with the title Intellectual Capital I see as companionship, intellectual companionship. And I will give you a few examples first, and then turn back to the categories these fantastic professors who provoked us started with. I will come back in the end to the categories of human capital, structural capital, and relational capital. But I begin with our nice event last night. It was intellectual companionship when the lady came and made us smell and touch and experience the food that was smelling knowledge. That was a taste of knowledge. It involved our feelings. It was different at the end of the meal when we had to return the meat because she made us really celebrate the food and understand what it was all about. At the end of the chapter I contributed, I returned to the new book of Merci Laurent and Leif Edvinsson. And the book is named World-Class Cooking for Solving Global Challenges, Reparadigming Societal Innovation. And that for them was more than a metaphor. They took up the tradition of the French training system, compagnonnage, detail cooking future society, and they were clarifying that the recipe to leverage the companionship includes, among others, caring for a pleasing atmosphere, and Jean-Eric Aubert, we all know him. He was consultant for the World Bank, for OECD, and he comments on this, and he writes, in times of climate change, digital revolution, global pandemics, we need to cook new societies, new ways of life, new forms of business. The ingredients are there, technologies, motivations, ideas, as well as the actors, peoples, groups, individuals, you and me. In other words, we in companionship. That was their conclusion. And the interesting thing is, and that if you look in the future, because the nice thing of your provocation with the book was to ask us to re-paradigm. And what is the re-paradigm? The New Club of Paris always said, we are agenda setters. What agenda? A transformative way of agenda setting is what the Frankfurt Book Fair is doing. They are actually, Frankfurt in that sense is actually the capital of intellectual capital. Because everyone who thinks he is important, he writes a book and then he goes there to propagate it. And if everyone is famous and everyone is important, nobody is famous. And they are all on the same eye level, actually. And the interesting thing is that the International Book Fair doesn't set the agenda themselves, but they choose a guest of honor. And suddenly a small country like Slovenia is setting the agenda. And they involve the whole city. All the museums work with Slovenia. They show, for example, archaeology, like tweets from the past. They work with the Communication Museum, and not just during the time of the book fair, but for half a year. The whole city of Frankfurt. Here, Guenter just mentioned the philosopher from Slovenia, but it was a debate in the university, together with a famous critical school of the Frankfurt School, like Habermas and people like that. And they discussed with the Slovenians. So the small thing which re-paradigms the whole framework is to have companionship with the guests of honor and make them to be the agenda setter. Another example. One of our great friends and also a member of the New Club of Paris is Anne-Claire Bartel. She started the Ready School. Ready School is refugee for digital integration. All the important people went there, and even the German Chancellor Merkel was there. Guterres, the UN Secretary, has visited the school because it was so great what they were doing. They got refugees, most females ones, who didn't get work in Germany, who were desperate, and they said, oh, we don't care whether you speak German or not. The most important skill at the moment are IT skills, so we start with that. And then you learn German afterwards, and you become an expert. And she was very successful with it. The people got employed. But now the re-paradigming, the next step, what she is doing now, she started similar schools in other countries, all over Germany, in Duisburg, in Munich. But now they started a companionship together with an initiative for elderly, for seniors. It's called Ways Out of Loneliness, Wege aus der Einsamkeit. And now suddenly these refugees help the elderly to develop skills in digitalization. The third step is they work together with a hacker group. And now they are so bold that they say, oh, we teach the German workforce to develop their digital skills. The refugees, female refugees, train German workforce to develop digital skills. And that is what I think is moving forward. It's not just another lighthouse project, but it is combining with others, and it's putting it on the new level. And that is the important stuff. And I promised I come back to the categories now. And if you look what actually is happening there, and you would start with human capital. And you would say human capital is actually emotionally augmented intellectual capacity. It's like an augmentation. And you would associate with intellectual capital, decision-making, judgments, skills, abilities, expertise. But on the other hand, you suddenly feel it is an intellectual resource to talk about emotions, about outrage, about empathy, about hate, about enthusiasm, about love, about pride, about shame, about guilt, or what we heard today, institutional trust. That are all emotional, and we take them as self-understood, but we don't really define them as intellectual resources, which they actually are. They are intellectual resources. And you feel that how they are misused. The whole discussion about, for example, what we have now with the conflicts in Palestine or the election, you have reduced it using the emotions, and the emotions trigger the narrative, and the business are triggering the narratives in order to trigger the emotions. But the emotions, again, result in decision-making, result in intellectual judgments. And I think that is important to understand. The structural capital would be the means and tools to express, perceive, and exchange those capacities. And you have the communication media, internet, artificial intelligence, broadcasters, or social media, or what we discussed today, haptical ways of using information like books. You have communication spaces, the physical spaces. That is also what you feel. You eat with your eyes, we say. So, and you will know that because you are academic director of people who specialize in it. And you have art, you have music, you have performing art, you have painting and sculpture. So we are using it, but we are not defining it like that. And that comes to the most important part now, the structural, the relational capital. The relational capital you can subdivide in the value systems we use, like solidarity, and solidarity is obligio solidaris. Fraternity. Interestingly, the people on the book fair, they discussed solidarity and fraternity, but the Shiros discussed it. They were called the Shiros because it was the ladies who promoted it. And they promoted looking at all these kinds of emotions and all these kinds of feelings. So it is not a question of labeling something as intellectual capital, but of understanding what it is. Otto Schama was just now distributing again one of his papers. And he talks about structural capital as social processes. He talks about human capital as roots. It's the soil, it's from the you down there, where you look into yourself. It's a soil for the procedures, and then he extends it to the social field. So he uses actually the metaphor of the gardener. And you remember, we talk about similar things, but we label it differently. So companionship is to first have a dialogue with yourself, being your own companion, and being your own companion means not being in a monologue, but in a dialogue, and then work together with others and co-create the future.
Thank you, Guenter, and all the panelists of really wonderful presentations and many ideas shared. But I have many questions, and I expect that audience has questions, but let's wrap up the discussion. Maybe as far as our book is about the future of intellectual capital, could you in 1 or 2 sentences just simply conclude, the role of intellectual capital in the future? We see a lot of disruption, a lot of risks, and very beautifully Stefan mentioned living organizations, leadership is required, cooking of new knowledge based on companionship, really beautiful ideas. But how to put intellectual capital in practice and how to foster, this concept, not only to understand what's behind it, but to put in action, to foster this understanding, what particular steps or any ideas, what could be done by us, not only in the research perspective, but really to put in place and to make impact, and not to leave it disrupted by some factors that are really risky and coming. Just 1, 2 sentences, how would you see what could be done by NCP, by communities, by also researchers in order to put it in practice? Could I ask you, who want to start? Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, shortly.
I just would say, I would say important is, and the additional value we have is to use the balance sheet in terms of finding out about incoherences. The incoherences, for example, in the mobility industry, when they produce electric cars, but they don't have recharging equipment. What happened in Germany, BMW did develop the electric cars, and Siemens stopped the charging equipment. And I think the intellectual balance sheet can easily show the incoherence.
Spreading the knowledge on and the idea of intellectual balance sheet. Great. Guenter, you have any ideas? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Stefan.
Very short, as we have to close, and looking forward to 2 more scientific presentations now. Change education. Yeah, so that is, I think, where we can have the impact on the next generation, change the education of the next managers towards new measures. That's
Great, thank you. Sladana, any ideas?
I don't know. I think we should maybe make a shift in that kind of focus. Maybe that resilience, social well-being should be really important. That's also connected with redefining values, success, and everything. But when we do research, when we do to increase visibility, so the global society can see the value of our research, I think the focus should be a little bit. we too much focus on innovation, on financial performance, organizational level, should be more broader. And this kind of, like end of our research, added value should go to social well-being, maybe resilience, right? Something like that. Agree with Stefan, probably changing education will also prepare next generation for, let's say, like better thinking about, let's say, future.
Great, great, thank you. Aino, any practical?
Okay, I don't know how practical I can be, but well, I think that really to live from thinking the kind of value you want to be creating and for whom, and then trying really to understand that we are at that stage when we don't need to speak about intangible assets as if they were separated from the natural assets, from the physical assets, from the emotional, from the energetic ones. I think that we are at the stage when we can think about the value, what we want to create, and then strategically trying to understand the combination of all of these things. And this will enable us to achieve this kind of balance between the different elements that Guenter Scogs, in my understanding, was referring to.
Thank you very much. We really see our book as an approach to change something and really want to encourage you to read the book. It's already submitted to Springer and will be published in February, so please read the book and distribute the ideas of the possible positive future of intellectual capital in your communities, in your countries. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you all the panelists for a really great contribution. And let's give the word to the academic speakers who are really waiting for their floor. Thank you very much.